There are quite a few collections of old buildings, clustered together for no other apparent reason than out of loneliness, masquerading as villages around the Fylde. We thought we'd take a gander at some of those that otherwise would never get mentioned anywhere, mainly because we had nothing better to do ourselves. We started with Thistleton, which, as its name suggests, is little more than a moth's sneeze on the map, as insignificant as Jacob Rees-Mogg's existence. It's a pleasant enough village in its own right, but it's the sort of place where its history consists entirely of who owned what messuage in what century, and which insert name here was dowager in insert date here. There are some old buildings worth a mention perhaps, such as the 17th century barn at Guild Farm and the equally old cottage at the stupidly named By the Way, not to mention the 18th century Ivy House, which we just did, but that's because we had nothing else to mention. In fact, Thistleton is so trivial that it's generally hyphenated together with the equally inconsequential Greenhall. Not the Greenhall in Garstang, this Greenhall doesn't even have the corner of a castle left. Greenhall in the Fylde is only worth a mention because, allegedly, Greenhall Lane is haunted by a ghostly coffin, which floats across the road for no apparent reason at midnight and ends up in the ditch. For obvious reasons, we weren't going to hang around to verify this. So we buggered off to Weaton instead, described online as a picture postcard village centre with a pretty green surrounded by fat cottages and the Eagle and Child pub. Presumably that was written by Charles Babbage on his difference engine, because there's a very definite lack of thatched cottages nowadays. Just one thatched multi-storey non-cottage and plenty of modern Barratt Homes style houses that look as though they'd been constructed from expensive Bakelite kits. The Eagle and Child gets its name from an old legend in which Sir Thomas Latham, finding himself without an heir, hid one of his many illegitimate children, one called Oscartel for some reason, in an eagle's nest, and then made sure that his missus found said child when they were out hunting and adopted him. Not that the story is applicable anymore, because the Eagle and Child pub nowadays has changed its name to just the Eagle, like the comic, presumably to save time so that the customers can get more drinking in. Apparently the Eagle has at least one resident ghost, because that takes less research, and according to legend, Oliver Cromwell once visited the inn. Of course he did. With regards to the Phantom, over the years the owners have reported objects moving of their own accord, a dog staring at the ceiling, that's the sort of thing that always spooks Yvette Fielding out, and the carpet rippling as though it's made of water. A clever trick, seeing as there doesn't appear to be any carpet down in the pub. I want to suggest the possibility of rats at this point, but I also don't want to get sued, so I won't. Because one ghost is seldom enough, the Eagle ... is also haunted by a highwayman called Murph, apparently. How they know his name I honestly couldn't say, but I don't want to make the obvious joke about daylight robbery because, again, I don't want to be sued. We couldn't leave Weaton without mentioning the hairy boggart that once slept in a barrow at Weaton Lane Head on the southeast side of the amusingly named Whitprick Moss, neither of which we could find, so we just took a guess and filmed a likely field. Apparently, back in olden times, which basically means that nobody actually knows when, a farmer was unwittingly ploughing through said barrow when his horses got spooked and shot off. The farmer himself shortly followed, pursued by a giant boggart calf. Whether the hairy boggart actually existed, of course, is open to debate, but the cairn certainly did. Being constructed of Firebird stones, it was excavated, and I use that term very loosely, back in the day to be recycled as paving. A large number of urns were discovered inside it in the process. What happened to them is anybody's guess. On to Catford, where at St Robert's Roman Catholic Church, amongst other holy relics, you can find the entertaining severed head of a martyred priest. By tradition, the skull belonged to Philip Holden, whoever he was, a martyred priest presumably, although the experts on severed heads nowadays more commonly believe it belonged to Miles Gerard Bamber, presumably again a martyred priest. Unfortunately, the church was locked when we got there. Of course it was, and there are no photographs of the interior, apparently, anywhere online, so you'll just have to put up with these generic images instead. The church is a bit top-heavy with Catholic martyrs, to be honest. Each of the lancet windows, which probably look better on the inside, but we'll never know now, depicting an individual martyr. Catholic ones, of course. The other religious martyrs don't get much of a look in. And the west wall, allegedly, listing even more. Other than that, Catford falls perfectly into our nothing much ever really happened here category, dating back to the 12th century when it was recorded as Cateford, and that's about it. Which was enough to make us bugger off to Inskip with its radio mass. Not that we got much chance to film them either, because at this point my camera started to seriously malfunction. Nonetheless, back in the smudge of history, especially during the two world wars, HMS Nightjar, as the military installation at Inskip was officially known, served as both an airfield and the communications centre. The runway was demolished in the 1970s. Nowadays, the place is owned by the Royal Navy and deals with clandestine, low-frequency radio signals for submarines. It's all a bit James Bond meets Doctor Who. Sticking with Inskip, back in 1889, workmen discovered a rather burnt-looking urn at Crossmoor, along with a rusted sword and a large dagger, which might have been a spearhead. It's difficult to say, seeing as both it and the urn are now missing. The Viking sword, I forgot to mention that it was Viking, is still knocking about somewhere though. The last time we saw it, it was in the little museum above the Grundy Art Gallery. Hopefully it's still in there somewhere. Our final destination was the Hand and Dagger at Trials, which, strictly speaking, probably isn't even in the Fylde, but with a name like that, it's close enough. Unfortunately, the truth behind the pub's name is considerably less salacious than it sounds. Originally it was called the Clifton Arms, but that gradually changed over the years, simply because the Clifton coat of arms was a hand and dagger, and was displayed above the door. I've often wondered why the Clifton coat of arms was a hand and dagger in the first place, but not enough to do any further research. After that, the camera stopped working entirely, so we went home, having wasted the day. Click like, subscribe if you're that way inclined, and despite our current technical difficulties and the fact that Jeanie McIntosh's exhaust is dropping off, we'll do our best to produce another episode of Lancashire Footnotes as soon as possible.